Welcome to Summoner's Rift. "30 seconds until minions spawn. Minions have spawned.
see, Karthus is doing amazing against Yone. He's up a ton of CS. His guy's got Eve. I am going to take my red and then go Invader Blue. Actually, we can take Dragon. I have Scanner. Would Yone come? Yeah, Yone is definitely missing. I don't think he's gonna come. Nice. I can't really Invader Blue now, it's a bit late. They're going home bottom. Probably just take Krugs, chickens, and then topside should be up after that. Should probably gank Set, he's pretty extended up there. Let's see. Nice, he's got it.
An ally has been slain.
I haven't really seen Evelyn in a while. I've already got a pink down up top. Okay, so that'll at least spook her and make her think I'm doing it. Maybe Yone will come up to investigate because he saw me ward it. Ah, close. Karthus ult? Oh, he's not got it. Nice. Oh, the Q! Nice, he missed. Okay, I should probably go straight there because I have ultimate. Does he have TP? No, he's got Ignite, that sucks. Maybe we can catch Evelyn on her way over here. I don't know if it's worth just getting Set alone. No, but he blew ult, so Jace can probably finish him off. He's got no Q ult. Wow, that does no damage. What does Karthus have? Not enough. Oh no, Evelyn. We need to get the Evelyn so that we can do the dragon. Oh, got his flash. Seraphine ult means we probably can't do it. One more Q, one more Q. Yes, let's do it. I don't think Yun is around. Oh yeah. What is that? Oh god. I got no smite. So Yone ult could totally steal this. We're Evelyn ult. I mean, I'll take it. It's a fire drag. It's the only fire drag of the game, so I don't mind too much. Oh, it's full health again, nice. Where's Eve to take chickens? Can I get the Eve first? If Jace collapsed on set, we could get set, yeah. Got his flash though, pretty huge.
Your turret has been destroyed. Welcome to Summoner's Rift. Seconds until minions spawn. Minions have spawned. has destroyed a turret. Killing spree. 30 seconds until minions spawn. Minions have spawned. An ally has been slain. destroyed. An enemy has been slain.
Riot has made a bunch of new changes for preseason 2023, and those changes included adding a whole heap of new items. Some of them are working okay, and some of them are breaking the game completely. Here is a clip of Kayle dying while her ultimate is active. This is because of a bug with Goliath's Ascendiary. If you didn't know, this is one of the new preseason items where basically every 30 seconds you charge an empowered attack which permanently gives you health. Apparently, as you can see in this clip, the attack goes straight through Kayle's ult. Normally this actually would be pretty hard to time, but there's also a Shaco bug where if you don't attack with your clone, then you just proc Goliaths over and over again. So just spaghetti on top of spaghetti. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Riot is changing Demonic Embrace. The win rate for this item has slowly been climbing over the last patch, and I guess Riot decided they wanted to shift it into more of a damage focused item instead of a tanky item. Its health is being reduced from 750 to 650, and its AP is being increased from 60 to 70. There's also a buff being shipped out to Mortal Reminder. It now only takes one attack to proc the empowered Grievous Wounds, where it used to take two. So pretty much now you just attack an enemy once and your Grievous Wounds is increased by 15%. Let me know what you think of these changes in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Riot is removing this from the jungle. Riot Flux posted this on Reddit very recently, and he said, I reduced the Gromp auto attack range by 25, not the leash range. I hope. Now this may seem a little bit insignificant at first, but I just went into the game to test it, and you can no longer do the double clear with Blue and Gromp, since Gromp's auto range has been reduced just enough so that it can't reach without resetting one or both of the camps. As far as I know, Riot didn't explicitly mention this. The closest they said was that they're decreasing the distance that camps can be pulled, but they didn't actually mention that it would remove double clearing altogether. So let me know what you think of this change down below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Summoner's Rift. 30 seconds until minions spawn. Minions have spawned.
You know, sometimes I'll go to my local mall just to hang out. With the lockdown slowly releasing constraints, I just miss wasting time at the local shops and window shopping. And the other day, when I was visiting a sport card shop because they had stocked the latest Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon card, I had to stop when I came across a rather haphazardly put together display. It was a display of Huggy Wuggy plushies. Huggy Wuggy being that of the first monster in the indie horror game Poppy Playtime. And I couldn't help but just stare at the display for a few minutes, as the existential dread of being a horror fan slowly immediately began to bile up in the pit of my stomach. I knew I had to talk about this. Manga comment here. I am no stranger to talk about horror games on my channel. Granted, it's not my bread and butter, as YouTube seems to despise whenever I don't talk about things that aren't negative in nature. Except Metal Gear Rising, my god, for some reason YouTube loves that. But I've always loved the idea of horror games. I love playing them. Hell, as cliche as it sounds, one of my favorite early horror games was Silent Hill. My god, babies with knives! Nowadays, I can look back and laugh. But when I was a kid in the ancient year of 1999, this stuff was legitimately scary to me. The game's use of low graphical fidelity and the use of polygonal models really lent a lot to the imagination of a young kid who snuck into his grandmother's basement with a borrowed copy of Silent Hill from his friend to play the family PlayStation that was down there. Yeah, I was a Sega kid back then. I bet on the wrong horse! But that game, even with the crude graphics, was something that honestly scared me as a kid. And yeah, M-rated games little kids should be playing do that to you. But when you grow up in a Christian household and go to a Catholic school, you tend to do things without your folks finding out. Hopefully my mother's not watching this video right now. Regardless, I bring this up just to give you guys an idea of where I stand with my horror games and roots. I played a ton of different horror games as I grew older and older, and some of them good, some of them bad, some of them fun, and others made me want to rip my hair out because of how frustrating they were. And as I got older, my fascination with games and games development grew. Even games that had horror elements drew my attention. It's why I love the Dead Rising series and how I hated how that series was butchered.
He's still Frank, but you know, his sense of humor is better.
You messed with my camera again, right?
You're a quick one.
That's what she said.
The idea of surviving hostile environments with monsters chasing you down and the mystery of what's happening is something that drew my attention. I love mysteries, and horror can have some of the best mysteries as they can branch out into more psychological crises. Even something as simple as Id is a game that had that same element. Sure, it wasn't as iconic as, say, the zombie turn in Resident Evil, but it's a game that I really want to talk about later. Hell, a lot of games that aren't horror-based can have horror elements to them that I enjoy. I've talked about this before, but I have memories of being afraid of Goma in Ocarina of Time, and the official art didn't help either. Now we come to today, where we have a ton of games that fall under the umbrella of horror, Omori being a psychological horror and at the same time cute. Yeah, I still want to make a video on that game. God, I got a lot on my plate. But not every horror game nowadays is to my taste, and hey, that's fine. What I say here is an objective standard. Well, save for the BS that's behind some of these games, stuff like what scares a person is totally going to be subjective. What scares one person is going to scare another. Horror is a very messy genre because of that, and sometimes there's things in games that take you out of it. In this video, I'm going to go outline some issues I have with modern day horror games. The first would be lore issues and story, the second would be technical and gameplay issues, and the third will be behind the scenes and corporate issues. And this will potentially have spoilers for the following games, so I'm just going to be on the safe side and give a bit of disclaimer for the following games and lore pieces. I want it to be known that I don't really hate these games. Hell, some of them I don't really represent the issues here. Rather, I have issues with them, and I can make a video about them all and possibly milk the ad revenue, but that's not what my channel is really about. Besides, it just makes more sense to talk about all this in one big video. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into it.
It's a funny thing, how so much can fall apart so fast.
Having a good story for your game isn't a requirement to make a good game, but when it comes to horror games, you need to have something to latch onto. I stated earlier that baiting a mystery as to why you're here, what made these events happen, why this funny bunny girl is chasing after me in a pizzeria, all those are questions that can entice a player into delving deeper and deeper into a game, trying to find any and all clues to the story, and that's great! Hell, it's because of deep lore that the FNAF series even got off the ground and really made a name for itself. The mystery, the allure, the tragic backstory of kids being... Yeah, that's why I don't talk about horror games so much, because YouTube doesn't like me talking about them. But back on track, that's what can really pull a person into a horror game. Even if you're not into the full-on mood being scared, a good narrative can really pull a person into it, regardless of gameplay or horror stuff. As of late, though, and... by late, I mean over the last few years, there have been a number of issues with horror game stories. One of the biggest issues is that some games are episodic. You had Bendy and the Ink Machine, and the current one is Poppy Playtime. Now, to make things clear, I understand why some games are episodic. Some games lack the funds to make a full-on game, or there's something going on with the creators behind the scenes that just makes it hard getting the games done. For that, I understand, but just because there's a justification, that doesn't mean I have to like it. Granted, I've got a bit of a bias against games that are released episodically.
Jesus, I shot myself!
But there are issues to releasing your games episodically, especially when it comes to narratives. Namely, you run the risk of ignoring crucial plot points or including details that weren't actually initially planned. Or in the case of some games, trying to capitalize on information in the game through NFTs and doing some pretty scummy things. But that's for later. Let's look towards Bendy and the Ink Machine. In a Reddit AMA on The Kindly Beast, Mike Mood said the following: "We innovate in other ways. By our stories, our characters, and our brands. Not how we make our games." Then you also have Meatley, aka Paul Crawford, the lead creator of the game, saying this:
Bendy is a very complex universe of interesting characters, both human and cartoon alike. But the truth is, from the beginning, I've had the whole story in mind. I know exactly where it's going to go, I know exactly what each character is going to do, and it's just a really cool thing to see it all come together like this. Yes, little things change here and there between chapters, but the main story itself has still remained untouched.
You really think someone would do that?
Now, if you're familiar with the final chapter of the game and some of the internet's reactions to it, you'll find out that a lot of people found it disappointing. But wait a minute, Mike Mood said this:
You know, we'd like to say what's going to happen, but really, at the end of the day, we need a beginning and we need an end of the game. Everything that happened in between was kind of developed as we went along.
Lies?
To make it clear, while developing a story, and if you have a fan base that's interacting with you, it's going to take feedback, but it opens up a lot of nasty possibilities that can overplot your story, or you introduce elements into said story that weren't supposed to be there in the first place and can bloat your story and change the ideas you had. It's something that a lot of game developers tend to overestimate when they're making games, and something you see in a lot of early developers. Ignorant ambition and underestimating game development are massive contributors to this possibility, and sometimes you'll end up with a messy story in a world that things had added to it that weren't supposed to be there initially. In the case of Bendy and the Ink Machine,
Bendy and the Ink Machine, at the end of chapter 4, or chapter 5, sorry, it explains the story. And it does answer a lot of questions. It does really cool. However, what we have done is left it up to the community. So if you play the game, and your name is Matt Pat. Hello, Internet!
theory crafting is fine, but because the ending leaves up so many questions up in the air, that means there won't be an actual answer to the story.
Shut down. An ally has been slain. Ally has been slain.
Hey everybody, Texas Dad here. I'm here with my son Matt. He is my son, and we are genetically related.
We are.
You gotta read the comments, y'all. That's all. You gotta read the comments. Today, I had a good friend send me a video, and me and Matt were just watching it, so we thought we would share it. It's very timely, it's very pertinent. And this video comes from Austria via Survival Lily. And she's just pointing some things out that's going on in Europe, and they are suffering from all the same issues, problems, and challenges that we're having, and all those issues have just been exacerbated
big time
by Nord Stream 1 and 2 magically exploding. So we wanted to review this video with you. And she has a lot of good suggestions on here, so we thought we would give it a whirl.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Hey guys, today I want to give you some prepping news from Austria and Europe. Unfortunately, we are in a pretty depressing situation when it comes to the economy. So first of all, we have about 10% inflation now, and now I have the feeling that people have spent most of their savings and they are living from month to month, from hand to mouth, and the prices of food and other commodities have increased quite tremendously. So here you can see an article in the newspaper that food has become so much more expensive. So for example, here they have a comparison. In January 2021, they were charging 30 euros for 4 chicken breasts. Now they are charging 18 euros. So that's 5 euros more for the same product, for the same food. And that's quite a lot. So now the problem is that people are getting so desperate that they are starting to steal much more than before. So here you can see an article about the German supermarket Lidl and Edeka, and they have observed that shoplifting has increased quite tremendously. So now they are putting alarm devices on butter and meat, and that's what you usually only see on very expensive electronic products. So now the next.
So we're experiencing a lot of parallels to this, I believe, supposedly, according to the Consumer Price Index, if you can believe the math, our current inflation that they said didn't exist, and then they passed the inflation.
destroyed. team has destroyed a turret.
Jerusalem and a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. He also hosts the award-winning weekly podcast Econ Talk, which I highly recommend. And he's the author of 5 books, including How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life, and most recently, Wild Problems, a guide to the decisions that define us. And that is the topic of today's conversation. We discuss the shortcomings of economics as a science, the power of books, the difference between wild and tame problems, Darwin's embarrassing attempt to rationally decide whether to get married, utility of techniques like decision analysis, incommensurate goods, free riding, counterfactuals, how the decisions we make change us, how bad we are at predicting future experience, changing moral norms, effective altruism, free speech, whether we are in fact making moral progress, social media, truth versus comfort, problems with consequentialism, free will, meditation, and other topics. Anyway, I really enjoyed this one. I hope you do as well. And now I bring you Russ Roberts. I am here with Russ Roberts. Russ, thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you.
So I've been looking forward to this. You are a truly OG podcaster. You got into the game earlier than I did. You have a great podcast, Econ Talk, and you have a wonderful new book, Wild Problems, a guide to the decisions that define us, which it was a great audiobook too. I think I consumed it all as audio on a few long walks, and it's especially good for that. It's really, you're a great company for those hours. So thank you for what you're doing, and perhaps you can summarize your intellectual and academic background that you're bringing to those projects.
Oh, well, thanks for the kind words about the podcast and the book. I should warn my podcast listeners that the audiobook is not read by me.
Yep.
Which they have complained about, but in a friendly way.
I was disappointed, but it's still good. So it's
thank you. I'm glad to hear it. My journey is a little bit off the beaten track, but I think the more you talk to people, the more you find out that there is no beaten track. But I started off as an academic economist, trained at the University of Chicago, taught at Rochester, Stanford, UCLA, Washington University in St. Louis, and George Mason, worked for a number of think tanks, including the Hoover Institution that I'm still affiliated with. But somewhere in there, I got interested in communicating economics to a general audience. So I wrote 2 novels that teach economics, wrote a couple of rap videos, started a podcast, wrote an animated poem. And strangely enough, about a year and a half ago, I got asked to be the president of a college in Jerusalem, Shalem College, Israel's only liberal arts college with a core curriculum in philosophy, history, great books, great texts, and decided to move to Israel and be the president of the college. So it's an unusual journey. I used to be really interested in economics. I'm still a little interested in it, but part of the reason I'm the president of this college is I got a lot more interested in philosophy, the life well lived, and education more generally, which is quite a hard thing to do well, it turns out.
Yes. So did you have a deep connection to Israel already? Had you spent a lot of time there, or was this truly a blind adventure?
Well, I'm Jewish. I've been to Israel, I don't know, before I moved here probably a dozen times, maybe more. I've always loved visiting. Never planned to live here. It was not a life. For some Jews, it's a dream to move to Israel and become a citizen. It was not our plan, but we jumped anyway when this opportunity came along to be president of Shalem College.
Did you have any Hebrew at that point?
A little bit, Katsat. No, I have a little bit more. My wife is semi-fluent in a conversational way. I'm embarrassing, but trying to get better every day.
Nice.
My college, all of our courses, almost everyone's taught in Hebrew. So that's, even though I'd like to sit in on, say, the Plato and Aristotle class or Homer or Shakespeare, I wouldn't get that much out of them, unfortunately. Maybe next year. We'll see.
Right. So before we jump into the book, which raises a lot of topics that are kind of core to my interest, you just said a few things about your perhaps waning interest in economics and the difficulty of charting a path through education that retrospectively makes a ton of sense. Perhaps you can give me some of your thoughts on the limits of economics as a discipline. I think many of us who are lay consumers of its products tend to marvel at how unlike a science it often seems to be. And
Sam, don't tell anybody.
So give me the kitchen confidential version of economics, but perhaps also you can say something about how you view the enterprise of education at this point and its challenges.
So economics is very mathematical as it's taught at the graduate level, and it's taught as if it were science. It's the science of human behavior in graduate economics and in undergraduate economics. I think that's the wrong word. It certainly is a formal way of thinking about human behavior, and the essence of that formal way of thinking is maximization. We're trying to get the most out of our money or our time. I think one of the misconceptions people have about economics is they assume it's only about the stock market or GDP or unemployment or interest rates. It is about many other things. It is about how we spend our time. It is about the power of leisure. And it's about the fact that if I choose one thing, I can't choose something else. So in many ways, economics is the study of choice. Choice under constraints. I don't have an infinite amount of money. I don't have an infinite amount of time. And in particular, economists are interested in both individual choices and then how choices aggregate in what are called markets. It's a funny word because we think of a market as like a farmer's market or stock market, but when economists talk about markets, they mean the complex dance between buyers and sellers in, say, housing or restaurants, and the prices that emerge from that process. And understanding those things and thinking about them thoughtfully is a tremendous craft, and it's very valuable and it's very useful. But economists are kind of imperialists. One of my professors, George Stigler, said, there's only one social science and we are its practitioners. Not the most humble view. I'm a big fan of George, but he was a very funny man, rare in our profession. But what he meant by that was the other social sciences don't really have any models. They're just they have some theories, but they're not rigorous. Whereas economists, they can predict, they can do sociology, they can do anthropology, they can do psychology. And I was trained that way, and it's a powerful toolkit for thinking about human behavior, but it has shortcomings. There are many things it's not very good at looking at, and as I've gotten older, I've started to think that those things that it's not very good at looking at are the things that most of us care the most about. Our sense of belonging, the tribes we're in, the kin folk we have, the sense of dignity that we crave, the feeling that we matter, that we're important, that people pay attention to us. These are the things that, with respect, these are the things that we care about. These are the things that bring deep satisfaction, not just happiness or fun or pleasure. When an economist talks about pleasure, they mean everything. They mean the ice cream cone, they mean a good job, well done, they mean a great vacation. The problem is that calculus of adding up pleasures and taking away pains, which is a fundamental utilitarian calculus, I think has limitations when applied to the things I was talking about earlier. Family, love, belonging, transcendence, things that we care about deeply. I don't think the tools of maximization fit very well in there. We need other tools, other ways of thinking about it. So as I got older, I got less interested in I got less interested in what economists' tools tell us and more interested in the parts of the world and our lives that economics has less to say about. I discovered Adam Smith's other book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is a book about ethical behavior, life well lived, why we do decent things to one another rather than merely be selfish and grasping. He says in there that the pursuit of money and wealth is a fool's game and will tarnish your soul. So those kinds of more philosophical thoughts became more interesting to me. The other thing that I think is related, which I think you're hinting at when you asked about education, is that most education as it's practiced in the United States and around the world is passing on of information and knowledge. And we live in a world where we have tremendous access to information and knowledge via Wikipedia, via YouTube, via podcasts. And what I think education should be about is the kindling of the fire that is the human mind. That's Plutarch's line, but I didn't say it in English. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. I think most education around the world, high school, college, and even sometimes in graduate school, there's a lot of filling of vessels and not much kindling of a fire. And I've gotten interested in the question of how do you allow someone to explore a great text. Read a great book on your own, and you read it in the company of other people, and with a great teacher to guide you, you're changed, you're transformed when it's done correctly. And that process, which is sadly missing in most undergraduate education, I think, around the world, is the magic. And when you've experienced it, and most of us never did as an undergraduate, when you do experience it, it's not just sharing ideas with other people, it's sharing ideas in a thoughtful way under the guidance of another great mind, the teacher. And that is gives you superpowers of how to read, how to think, how to talk with other people respectfully. I think it's the essence of what I think of as real education. It's what we try to do here at Chilham College. We don't always succeed, but that's the gold standard.
Yeah, and I often think about reading a great book as a conversation, even though it is in one direction. If you, as you point out, if you're having a larger conversation with a great teacher and your own colleagues about the book, it definitely enriches the experience. But yeah, that's the wonderful thing about books. We have, some very smart and in many cases wise person's side of a conversation that they have taken, in many cases, years to prepare. So we're getting the best of their thoughts, and we're getting them across the centuries. It's really amazing. What an amazing technology a book is.
How strange, though, that even though it's one-sided, when you read it 10 years later, the second time, they're saying something different.
Yeah.
A really great book is a conversation in that sense. And Agnes Callard, the philosopher, said to me when I had her on Econ Talk, she said, great teaching is teaching you how to talk to dead people. And that's the magic of a book. It's extraordinary. And there are a lot of really talented dead people worth talking to.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your book. Again, the title is Wild Problems. And you distinguish wild problems from tame ones. Maybe that's a good place to start. What are wild problems and what are tame ones?
Tame ones are ones that we can find solutions to using data, an algorithm, evidence. What movie do I want to watch Saturday night? You get a pretty good idea of what might be interesting to me from recommendations that I would get online. If I want to get from Boston to Chicago and beat traffic as much as possible, Waze or Google Maps will help me get there. I want to get to the moon. It's a tame problem. It's not an easy problem, but we know how to do it. It's a certain set of steps. There's a recipe. And certain problems in life, recipes are the way to go. An algorithm is the way to go. And we're spoiled. We have lots of those techniques for many of the challenges we face in life. We have websites to give us recommendations. We have the wisdom of crowds to help us with recommendations even more richly. And we'd like most of life to be that way, and most of life is, actually. It's a remarkable time to be alive with the tools that we have for those kind of problems. The problem is there's a handful of problems in our lives that aren't like that, where data and evidence are of very little value. And the standard decision-making tools, I argue, are not helpful. In fact, they mislead us. These are problems where we don't have a lot of data, either because things aren't measurable, or the people who have access to the experience can't share it easily. It's hard to put those things into words. Or after I make a decision one way or the other, I'm going to be a different person. I'm going to be changed. And so it's even a question of whether rationality is well defined. So these kind of problems are whether to get married, who to marry, whether to have children, how many, where to live, what kind of career to pursue. Now, on some of these problems, you can get some information. You can get some information about the average salary in a business field, for example. It may or may not apply to you. You can certainly ask people if they're happy if they're married or happy if they have children. But I think those are very thin, unbelievably thin and sterile ways of thinking about these kind of choices. And as I suggest in the subtitle, these are the decisions that define us. They turn out to tell us both who we are and who we can be. And I think for many of these decisions, trying to make a cost-benefit analysis, which is the economist's central element of the economist's toolkit, is, I think, the wrong way to go. The most important pieces of those cost-benefit analysis, are hard to measure, can't be entered thoughtfully, and we're often deceived by the ease with which we can quantify certain things, and that often pushes us to ignore others. I make the analogy of the person coming home from the party, can't find their keys, they've lost them, someone comes to help out. Finally, the person helping says, are you sure this is where you lost them? No, I don't think it is, but this is where the light's best. And, I think it's under the street light.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we're seduced by where the light is best, and often the most interesting things are in the shadows and the darkness. So part of my book is trying to help people live in the darkness.
Well, I want to get into some of the core ethical and meta-ethical issues around how we conceive of what is good, and the questions about measurement and aggregating utility. I know you have concerns about the limits of utilitarianism or consequentialism, as I usually refer to it. And I share some of those, or at least I acknowledge the veracity of some of those concerns. But I think there might be some daylight between us philosophically there. And all of this has implications for other things you and I have both talked about in other contexts, like effective altruism, which is in vogue at the moment. But before we get down to something like bedrock, let's stay at a level above that and just kind of around the pragmatics of just how people make decisions, how they can make decisions, what is worth thinking about, and how, as you point out, so much of our recipes for a good life don't really prove that useful when you're trying to weigh up the pros and cons of a major decision that defines us. And as an example, in your book, you spend a lot of time looking at Darwin's certainly comical, but in the end, somewhat silly checklist for deciding the pros and cons of marriage. Perhaps you could describe what Darwin was up to there and use that as a jumping off point.
Sure. So Darwin was 29 years old. He'd taken his trip on the Beagle, and he was thinking about settling down. So he wasn't sure it was a good idea. And being a rational person, he made a list of the pros and cons of marriage. It's a really embarrassing list. For starters, at one point he says a wife would be better than a dog anyway to come home to. A very low bar.
One can be thankful he wasn't test piloting this on Twitter, because
he'd be done.
We would not have had the origin of species.
Exactly, we'd be done. It's a low bar even in the 19th century. But, it's so that part is a little bit, it's embarrassing. When you look over the list, and it's a little bit disorganized, I reorganized it a bit in the book. When you look at it, the negatives of marriage are both more numerous and more serious. The positives are things like somebody to come home to, maybe companionship. The negatives are things like stuck with their relatives, socializing with them, the expenses of childbearing and child rearing, the tragedies of losing children to illness, won't have time to do your science, won't make an impact on the world. It seems like a no-brainer. When you look at the list, if someone brought this list to you and said, what do you think? You'd say, well, obvious choice, don't get married. You risk not becoming one of the greatest scientists of all time in return for what he calls female chit-chat. Another less than honorable summary. So, despite that, he then scribbles we have his journal, so we have this in his own hand. At the end, he writes this stream of consciousness narrative about how horrible it would be to be returning it alone to his dingy apartment at night. And all this rational pro-con list falls apart. He just finally says, I'm going to marry, marry, marry! Exclamation point after each one. QED. And that, Quatus demonstratum, that was to be proved. It's over. It's like a math proof. Got to get married. And there's a puzzle. Why would the decision that he clearly favors in the sober light of day, which is to not marry because it's going to be likely not worth it to him, and by the way, Kafka makes the same list. And he overwhelmingly decides it's also similar. It looks horrible. And so he doesn't get married. But Darwin does. And I think it's about 6 months later he marries his cousin, which is amusing because it means that the relatives he was worried about were his own relatives. So anyway, why? What was he thinking? The standard answer would be, well, he just made an emotional decision. He went with his gut. I don't think that's what's going on. When you look at his list, and it would be true of anybody making such a list, and I actually opened the book with a conversation with a friend who was trying to decide whether to have a child, and he and his wife made a list of the pros and cons, and he told me after they made the list, they couldn't decide. There were so many pros and so many cons that were so seemingly evenly weighted. And certainly Darwin and my friend, I would suggest, don't know much about marriage or childbearing, child raising. Certainly in the case of marriage, there's nothing in Darwin's list about love, sharing a journey through life together, the ups and downs of that emotional experience. He didn't have any access to it. How could he know about this thing? Now, he could read novels. I don't know if he's a big reader of novels, but his married friends, if he had any, which he probably did, he could see them socializing. But most people who are married can't explain the specialness of staying with somebody for decades. They can't explain, and by the way, it's not all rosy, of course. Certainly you can't appreciate the upside, but there's also sometimes a very bad downside. All of that is veiled from most of us before we make a decision about whether to get married or not, or whether to have children, or whether to move to Israel, or whether to become a chemist rather than a lawyer or a poet. And so how do you think about that? I mean, how do you, when you confront that, and I think what Darwin confronted was, I see myself, I have always seen myself as a married person, as a father. And so he took a leap. He married, he had many children. Tragically, some of them died, but he had a very good marriage most of the time. Towards the end, he had some issues with religion and his wife. His wife was very religious. But for most of their life, they had a blessed marriage, a wonderful marriage. And ironically, one of his favorite things, she did what, I don't know if I mentioned this, he was worried they might have to leave London. What if she doesn't like London? She didn't like London. They had to move to the countryside. Turned out he liked it. He liked coming home or spending time with her at night. She would read to him. So many of the things that make marriage and a shared life with another person special, he didn't know about, but something in him knew that it was worth making a leap over, even though it didn't appear to be a good choice. And I give many examples in the book of people from the world of science, math, very analytical areas, where these kind of decisions, they make what appears to be an irrational decision. And I would suggest it's not irrational, and neither are they making a decision with their gut. What they're doing is they're recognizing, as I think we all can and should and sometimes do, that these decisions are about more than just how happy will I be day to day with another person or with a child or living in a different place or in a different kind of career. Those are not the only things we care about. Those day-to-day concerns, which I call narrow utilitarianism, they're not irrelevant. They matter. They're what economists tend to focus on. They are only, though, part of the story. The rest of the story is the overarching narrative of our identity, our sense of self, of who we are, and the virtues of those identities, and who we could become, not just who we are now. In the economist model, you have a set of preferences, and you try to get the most out of them. The idea that you might want to change your preferences, that they might be unattractive or immoral, is hardly ever considered. But in real life, we should consider those things. We should consider who we want to be, who we want to become. And those choices we're talking about set us on those paths. And so it's about more than just the day-to-day pleasure or pain. I argue in the book, I don't know if you're married, Sam. I don't know if you have children.
Yeah, both.
I'm married. I have 4 children. It is very possible that the number of days as a parent that are positive are smaller than the number of days as a parent that are negative. There are a lot of bad days. Things go wrong with your kids. They have challenges. They have trauma. You can't help them. They are not just like you. They give you heartache, but they also give you joy. And they are amazing. And they give you a taste of what it's like for your own parents. They connect you to your own parents in ways that are unimaginable. They create a future for you couldn't have otherwise. It's not for everyone. It might not even be a good idea for everyone. It's certainly not. But it's not just about the number of good days versus the number of bad days. There's so much more at stake there. And I think people realize that.
Okay, well, as much as I wanted to hover above it, I'm feeling the gravity of the issues you have with consequentialism pulling us inward. So there's a lot in there. Before we truly slip over the event horizon, maybe I just want to ask you about a tool. I think this is properly in the economics toolkit. I learned it in the engineering economic systems department when I was an undergraduate at Stanford. Actually, you say you taught at Stanford. What years were you there?
I was there 85 to 87.
Okay. So
and then a lot of summers visiting.
Interesting. That's exactly when I was there. That's when I was a freshman in 85.
Taking economics?
So I took it. So did you know Ron Howard?
It's funny you mentioned Ron Howard. I had a story from my book that it didn't get into the book, but he has some very, very. I heard a story about him from one of his students that I almost put in the book. I can share it if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Cut it if you want.
Yeah.
So part of my book is about certainty and our desire for certainty, and that's the power of an algorithm, an equation, an app. It tells us what to do, and then I'll make the best decision. We have such a craving for that. Uncertainty makes us uneasy. And somebody told me a story about Ron Howard that I thought was really extraordinary, which was, I heard the story from the student. I contacted Professor Howard, and he gave me his version. And what I'm going to give you now is might be one or the other or a mix, but the point is the same in both of them, which is that on his exams, with each question that you answered, you had to assign a probability that you were right. And the higher the probability that you assigned to a question that you got right, the more points you got. And the higher the probability that you assigned to a question you got wrong, you'd lose points. And he told people, he said, don't put 100% certainty next to any answer. Because if you put 100%, that you're 100% certain and it's wrong, you will get a score of negative infinity. And negative infinity cannot be outweighed by your score on the final. If your midterms are negative infinity, you fail the class. So that was the story. So he gives the exam, and some people, I don't know how many, put 100% on a question that they got wrong. And their lives were, who knows what happened to them. I don't know how much he actually enforced it. He did tell me that at some places where he taught, they didn't allow it. They found it cruel to give students, confront them with this decision. It hardly seems cruel to me. And what's powerful about it, of course, is that this student who told me the story had the class 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it says, I've never forgotten that, because it taught me that you should never be 100% certain about anything. And that is, I believe, a very, very deep lesson in life, and very, very useful to be aware that some uncertainty cannot be resolved. Certainly, shouldn't be 100% sure of anything. And so that's my Ron Howard story. But I never knew him when I was at Stanford.
Oh yeah, it was too bad. He's really, I have lost touch with him mostly, although I did interview him for my book, Line, maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. But he had a great effect on me ethically more than anything else, because he taught this course that he called the Ethical Analyst. I think it was a graduate seminar, but it was just an investigation, just a conversation among 10 or 12 of us for a quarter about whether or not it's ever ethical to lie, right? And you very quickly push past the Anne Frank scenario, and then you're talking about white lies really for the rest of the course. And it really seemed virtually everyone else in that class came out of the black box of that course. It really changed with respect to the ethics of lying. And I wrote a short book titled Lying that was really my version of what I learned when I was 18 in that class. But he also taught and really pioneered this area of, I don't know what it's considered now, if it's operations research or I don't know, where you find it on the shelf, but it's called decision analysis. And it's a technique of integrating all the information one has about a decision and all of one's probabilistic intuitions in a systematic way so that you can make what purports to be a more rational decision than just doing what Darwin did with a the pros over here and the cons over there, and you sort of stare at your piece of parchment, in his case for a while, and then you throw up your hands and you make a gut decision, integrating everything you've been ruminating over. So what Howard purported to be able to do, and it, the experience of using the tool, I almost never do it, but back in the day when I was studying it and trying to apply it to my life, it did seem better than just the pros and cons. It seemed like it allowed you to systematize your intuitions, and especially he demonstrated this a lot in class, that we're far better at making probabilistic judgments than we think we are. Like if you ask a class of undergraduates, how many McDonald's franchises are there on Earth at the moment? And you get certainly you see something like the wisdom of the crowd if you aggregate those guesses, but most people are pretty good. They're not orders of magnitude off. And it's true for probabilistic judgments about things that are going to happen in the future. And you can get better at doing that. So I guess this is a long way. And I actually don't remember whether Ron did that on any of the tests I took for him, but that's a very Ron thing to have done with infinite negative outcome. But it was an experience of feeling like we could, in some perfect world, get better at aggregating our complete state of information. And thinking about this from the other side, as a counterpoint to what you just suggested, what else do we have to go on but the totality of information we have and think we have about the what's likely to happen on the basis of taking one path or another? And couldn't we, at the end of the day, also build into our forward-looking model of what's likely to happen the probability that will be changed by the decision itself? And this is a topic I want to explore with you. That just, as you point out, certain decisions change it. So what's so silly about Darwin's list is that he's so completely blind to this prospect, and really this certainty that once you're married, things are going to seem different. You're not able in this list to value things the way you will value them once you have this wife that you love, right? And so anyway, I gave you a lot there, but what do you think about decision analysis or some other as yet uninvented tool for leveraging our rationality more than we do at present?
I think about emails I get, ads that pop up on my web pages about try this is the path to being more productive, this is the path to being more fit, the 7-minute workout. You ever click on the 7-minute workout, Sam?
Yeah.
You ever look at it?
That was popularized by the New York Times.
Yeah, I tried it for a while. Separated my shoulder doing one of the dips on my piano bench. It was a mistake. But the bigger mistake was thinking, wouldn't it be awesome if there were a 7-minute workout and we wouldn't have to really work? And studies show that the 7 minutes are enough, I'm sure, somewhere. There might even be peer reviewed. There's data and evidence that shows that it's true. I think, so there's a lot of things to say to what you said. I'm not sure I remember everything I want to comment on, but I'd start with the fact that our brains don't always process things so well. And we often look for the easy way out or the thing that we already have decided. But we tell ourselves a story, the narrative fallacy, and we will find data to convince us that we made the right decision. And we'll ignore the data that's on the other side. And I think being aware that's very powerful. Having said that, use data when you can. I'm not anti-data. I'm not anti-pro-con list. It's a good idea. It's just that the point of Darwin's story is that if you are not careful, you will leave out some of the most important things. If you have a really good decision-making process and you remember those things and you seek counsel, which is always a good idea, ask a friend who you trust and who can be honest with you to help you think about what should be thought about. That's very powerful. It's not unimportant. And then perhaps to even think about how you ought to weigh the different things. But I think the other part that I comment on is that the idea that I can imagine what my life will be like in the future as a married person or as a parent or as a resident of a different place or in a different kind of career, that's an illusion. That's not like, well, I'll do the best I can. No, it's an illusion. You can't get very good at it. And here's the other hard point. The things that will come to mind are often the things that are more tangible, and the intangible things are going to be hard to remember. That's one good reason why you should seek counsel. Certainly a good friend can help you think of those intangible things. But at the root of part of the critique that I'm trying to make in the book, which has a critique of economics under the surface, is pointing out that many pleasures are not commensurate. And to think that I can tot them up, I can just pile them up and then subtract away the pains, ignores the fact that there are certain issues where that's not the right calculus. This really rears its head in ethical decisions or decisions of commitment, right? How should I treat my spouse? How should I treat my wife when I'm thinking about my obligations? Should I think, well, what can I get away with to be as happy as possible? tempting, right? And it's a natural impulse. We're hardwired, very much hardwired, to look for ways to take advantage of our spouses, our friends, to do what helps us and not have to make sacrifices, to free ride on their efforts. And what works in the other direction? Well, loyalty, love, commitment, honor, ethics, religion, there's a bunch of things. But for many of us, those things are weak. And so would you argue that, the best marriage for you, not the two of you, but for you, is to see how much you can get away with in terms of the daily responsibilities of carpooling and dishes and cooking and cleaning and filling out the taxes. And, maybe your wife won't notice. I mean, we all understand that's despicable. It's not an honorable path, but there's nothing attractive about it. And we'd argue that that's wrong. It's just wrong. But why is it wrong? I mean, it seems like, isn't that what we do through most of our life? We look for advantages. We look for a chance to get ahead. We look for what makes me as happy as possible. But we have to also understand that sometimes that's just wrong and shouldn't do those things. But they're hard to do. So should you do a cost-benefit analysis? And then, on your deathbed, realize you've been a horrible person, even though you're really happy. Right? I think that's horrifying. I think most of us recoil at the thought of that. So I think the standard decision-making analysis, if you're not careful, leaves out ethical considerations, shared experiences that are often complicated. It leaves out the incommensurability of certain pleasures over others. You can't just add them up. And for me, part of my goal in this book is to help people recognize there's no right decision. There's no best decision. I think this is really hard for people when it comes to marriage. Who to marry, not whether to marry, but who to marry. I want to find the best possible spouse, like a car. I want to find the car that's best for me. So I get on, fill out a little questionnaire. How many children do you have? Do you like to drive fast? And I found out the best car for me is a two-seater. That's not what a spouse is. It's a different kind of decision. For figuring out which car is going to give you the most pleasure, sure. If it doesn't have a back seat, you understand what you're giving up. If it's a minivan, you understand what you're giving up. But when it's a spouse, a particular person, a woman of that one, what are you giving up? Well, you could find a nicer one. You could find a smarter one. You could find a prettier one. You could find a more exciting one. You name it. So is it always a mistake? How should you think about that? It's not easy to think about with the rational decision to make in that context. So I'm not saying, then flip a coin or do whatever you do. Just choose randomly, close your eyes. But don't fool yourself into thinking that you're going to make a rational decision in these kind of areas like you do with what kind of car to buy.
Well, maybe this is a good place to invoke Herb Simon's concept of satisficing, because that gets at what we do instead of arriving at some pinnacle of rationality where we know that we've surveyed all of the counterfactual landscape and we can know we've made the right decision, right? I guess maybe we should also talk about how you think about counterfactuals here, or whether and to what degree you do.
Yeah, I use, there are some charming mathematical models of marriage, and I'm sure of many other complicated aspects of life, and they're cute and clever, but I think they're a little bit dangerous. Alain de Botton said it best: you will marry the wrong person. And of course, sometimes it's literally true. He meant it a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Sometimes you will literally marry the wrong person, a person who brings out the worst in you, a person who not only doesn't float your boat, but crashes you on the rocks. That we make sometimes terrible mistakes when we face these wild problems. But he meant something a little more whimsical, which is that the best person is not what you should be seeking. And again, I would just point out the human urge that I think many of us have, partly because of our experience in other areas, but partly just maybe because it's the way we're wired, to find the best. It's a very natural idea. I don't think, I say in the book, it's not a question of settling. I'll just settle for this one. You have to settle. Think about it for a minute. You realize that you're not going to survey the entire counterfactual landscape. Even if you did, even if you literally could imagine all the possible spouses in the world for your partners, most of them won't take you. And most of them, you have no idea how it's going to turn out. And I didn't quote this in the book. A friend of mine says his father taught him that he said, until you get married, you're an idiot. And I certainly feel there's some truth to that statement. When you're young, unmarried, never shared a life with someone, and you imagine what it's going to be like, you can spend all your days on that counterfactual, but you're kind of wasting your time. You can't imagine both the up and downside, by the way. It's not just the upside. I do argue in the book that a lot of these decisions, the downside is obvious, the upside is less so. Yeah. I give the example from Tom Chivers' book of the woman who wears a robot baby so she can find out what it's like to be a mother.
Right.
And the baby cries and gets a dirty diaper, I guess, and don't feed it. Well, that's the downside for most of us of children. If we're lucky, that's the downside. It can be worse, but that's those are some of the hard parts, waking up in the middle of the night, etc. The upside is very, very hard to explain. And it's hard to put into words, even if you're an eloquent person. And so you're going to neglect that. Most of us don't have children for rational reasons, or so-called rational reasons, the cost-benefit kinds of reasons. We have children because we think, like Darwin, we think it's something I think I want to experience in life, it's something I think I should do, or it's traditional, especially within a day when it's less so. A lot of people now view it as a choice. It wasn't a choice until recently, most of the time, through human history, people had children because of course they would have children. It's not even a question. And now it's a question. So, thinking about that question, you will see the downsides. You'll see your friends with children not going on interesting vacations. You'll see them looking tired and dragging around because they didn't sleep well. You'll see them driving that horrible minivan that's boxy and ugly. And you'll see them going to soccer games, as I argue in the book, yelling to 3-foot-tall creatures, "Don't bunch up." Mm-hmm. Well, that does not look like a joyous life. It looks like hell. But there is an upside to children, and it's not easily seen until you have them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just important to do.
Yeah, also, just put this on the more limits to rationality side of the ledger. As far as I know, it's been a while since I've looked at the research, but last I looked, all of the psychological research on parenthood suggests that nothing reliably diminishes people's subjective sense of their own well-being more than having children. And people tend not to recover until they're empty nesters and have their time fully restored to them. You're probably familiar with Dan Gilbert's work and the other behavioral economists who have looked at this. I don't know if there are caveats to that, but I just remember Dan presenting various graphs of people's reported well-being, and you get two things from him. One is we're impressively bad at predicting how good or bad certain experiences are going to be in the end. So when we think of a really bad experience like becoming paralyzed, or a really good experience like winning the lottery or getting some great new job, we tend to overestimate the effect it will have on our well-being. And what seems to have been established from psychological science, one hope it replicates, is that most of us have a set point of sorts that we return to even after major displacements to the good or to the bad that life throws at us. So there's that, but then there's just this very long displacement that some researchers have detected among parents who have a fairly long slog to get back to the moment where their time is truly their own. I think we both would agree that those data don't capture everything that's good about being a parent, and to some degree we have, Danny Kahneman's two selves to credit here with our confusion. I mean, the experiencing self who can be surveyed moment to moment with a kind of an experience sampling technique. I send you a notification 17 times a day, and you just have to give me a number rating your subjective well-being, versus the remembering self, who's the one I talk to when I ask you, well, so how good is your life, globally speaking, and you give me a story about how satisfied you are. Those two, impressively break apart. Unlike Danny, I have some hope that we can actually truly integrate them in our thinking about human flourishing. He really has given up on that project. But yeah, I guess I'm wondering what is missing from that picture in your view. Maybe perhaps we can use parenting as the kind of clinical case study here. If we can't really capture all the relevant data in data, and by just asking people who have gone before us into that wilderness, just how good or bad is it, because they are reporting back, how can someone make the decision, and how is it anything less than an irrational gut decision, or just a conformity to what everyone is, the norms that are on display around them? If we really understood human flourishing better than we do, and we were wiser than we are, and all of this was moving in the right direction, what kind of conversation do you think we'd be having 100 years from now about how to decide to become a parent?
Well, I'm not sure we've made much progress on human flourishing. It's not exactly the question, but I don't think it's unrelated. I think as individuals we make progress. I feel I have a better understanding of myself and what I care about. At 68, I think I was 16, but I doubt how much of that is somebody who 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. I haven't changed. Urges and imperfections, flaws, biases, cognitive shortcomings, they haven't changed at all. And I think what happens is, if you're lucky, you should get older, and if you're lucky, you become a little more thoughtful. You start to become aware of how these shortcomings, flaws, biases, urges control you. And you start thinking about what you might do to control yourself in a different way, thought a lot about, I know, to be more mindful of what you're doing with your life. And
well, not to derail you, Russ, but that's just too tantalizing and pessimistic to leave aside. So you don't think we've made a ton of progress collectively in our ethical intuitions and the norms that enshrine them and force people, each next generation to share these intuitions. And we now have intuitions about, say, a practice like slavery, right? Or, cat burning apparently was a great pastime in, I don't know, it was 15th century France or 14th century France, right? I think Steven Pinker opens one of his bright and optimistic books with this example of, it used to be that the genteel people of Paris would love to see a bunch of cats put in a sack and lit on fire, right? We recoil from that now, and I think we think we're right to, and we have a story about compassion and the very real suffering of, in this case, animals, or in the case of slavery, other people just like ourselves, who can now be recognized as such, but weren't recognized to be proper people a mere 150 years ago by many people, and still aren't recognized, actually, in certain pockets of humanity. So doesn't that all look like real progress to you?
Not really. Let me give it a go.
Yeah.
There's definitely progress, at least it appears to be, right? I'm pretty confident there's certain things that we now recoil at that we should recoil at, and it would have been a better world if people had recoiled at them sooner. The challenge is that picking out cat burning, you got to look at the whole picture. I mean, that's a cause. So we don't do cat burning, or at least if you do cat burning, you're looked down on by certain people. It seems like a step in the right direction. Here's what I would think about on the other side. I would remember Chuck Klosterman's point, but what if we're wrong? That many things that we think of as civilized and normal, people at different ages thought were civilized and normal, and turns out they were wrong. They weren't nice. Slavery, of course, was justified and was thought of as beneficial for the inferior people. That was wrong. That was a terrible mistake. But it could be that there are certain intuitions we have that we think are obviously true, might not be true. I think cat burning would not be one of them. I think that probably is the right thing. I'm pretty confident. Not 100%, being an indirect student of Ron Howard. 99.999. Pretty confident that's a step in the right direction. But what about the things that are really awful, like the Gulag or the Holocaust? These were in the 20th century. I mean, you're looking back at Paris in 1500 and saying, those heathens. Well, 80 years ago, in the most civilized places on the face of the earth, Germany, the most educated places on the face of the earth, they thought it was not just useful to kill Jews, but morally correct. What happened there? Now, you could say, well, we finally figured that one out. It took a while. It was true. 1933 in Germany, it did. We struggled with it. It's kind of hard to. I think it's hard to make that argument. I think there's a darkness in the heart of the human creature that is not easy to distinguish. People are saying that now. We're looking at the state of discourse in the United States and other countries around the world. It looks a lot less civilized than it was. So I certainly agree that there are things that have gotten better, but in a certain sense, even a more fundamental question of the day-to-day life. We started this talking about flourishing. So yes, some moral intuitions we've made progress on. I think we've really gotten better at discovering what a meaningful life is. Do you think we know more than Marcus Aurelius or the author of Ecclesiastes or Homer or Faulkner or Shakespeare? I mean, these things really changed? I think not so much. That would be my view. You want to push back, give me a more optimistic story?
Well, I think there is ground that gets conquered by culture that we don't have to continually reconquer, or if we do have to reconquer it, all the work is done for us, right? So we can do it very quickly. Right? So it doesn't take us. I would share your view of the Holocaust, but the reason why
going out in the limb, Sam.
Yeah. But I would add that the reason why we can so clearly condemn it without burning really any intellectual fuel at this point, I think we might still be hard pressed to do anything like persuade a real neo-Nazi who's probably convinced both it didn't happen but should have, right? But the failures of persuasion aside, I think the better part of humanity has gotten better and better at what Peter Singer describes as extending the moral circle, right? So that it's just we recognize more and more of us, more of the time, recognize with less and less effort that caring about the suffering of distant strangers is part of what it means to be a good person and to live an examined life at this point, right? You can't be a good person and declare to everyone in your circle that you really don't care about anyone you don't know personally. So if you hear about a child being thrown into a wood chipper by his maniac parents, you don't care because it's not your child. You don't know his or her name. That problem doesn't concern you, right? No, you're going to be horrified, and your horror may degrade some with distance, but you'll be horrified even if it's over in Africa or India or someplace you haven't been, among people whose culture you don't understand and whose language you don't speak. And that I think we've gotten better and better at. I mean, I think that the problem that Adam Smith pointed out still is there, that our concern across those ever-widening circles degrades so precipitously that it's true to say that you tell a man that an earthquake swallowed a generation of people in China, you might think about it, it might trouble you for some time, but you tell that same man that he's going to lose the tip of his pinky finger tomorrow in some necessary surgery, that will consume him, every moment of the day and night until it happens. So there's a mismatch there. But I think more and more people, and this is what education is for, right? Insofar as people are actually educated, and this is what the humanities are for, right? They're part of a larger conversation about moral norms. Yeah, I don't think we have to. I think we, with something like real alacrity, every present generation of human beings can recognize that a tribal genocide based on conspiracy theories and notions of the purity of German blood, this is not a good thing, and we need not revisit all the arguments as to why. And so it is with slavery and cat burning and all the rest. But as to I think the steeper challenge you posed as to whether many people are as wise or wiser than Marcus Aurelius in any generation, I would say no. I mean, he's in the 99th percentile in any present generation. But I think the culture around normal people and the norms enshrined there can embody his wisdom more and more. And I think it is. I think I would be inconvenienced by looking at Twitter today and having to defend, the moral panics on display there. But I think the general trend is still discernible. And I think I know you have your doubts about effective altruism, but one of the things that I think the center of the fairway of effective altruism is actually bringing to the conversation about philanthropy and ethics. There are kind of outlier bits of weirdness, and I think the movement does still suffer from its online roots to some degree, and that's why I can't just declare that I'm an effective altruist, capital E, capital A. But insofar as my conversations with Will McCaskill and other effective altruists have changed my approach to doing good in the world, I do think that some of the epiphanies there are durable gains in just the conception of how to mitigate human suffering, and how we can get better at that, and how getting better at that actually matters.
I used to think that. I think you said, first I want to commend you for your summary of the Adam Smith story, which the earthquake versus the little finger, you said it beautifully. Smith's lesson about that, by the way, is that this leads to a puzzle. If you indeed care more about your little finger than you do about the deaths of millions of people very far away, and then were offered a chance to save your little finger by killing millions of people, you would be horrified. Yeah. And yet, your moral intuition, not your more emotional intuition, is that you care more about your finger than most people, so why wouldn't you kill them? And that's really the jumping off point for why we do anything nice. So I love that, and I think your point about the fairway of effective altruism, rather the center of the fairway rather than the rough side of the fairway is a good point. I have a lot of respect for the effective altruism movement. I think the idea that our charitable money should cause good in the world rather than just make us feel better about ourselves is a deep and important idea. I think it's the devil's in the details, unfortunately, spending enormous amounts of money on deworming because that's the most powerful use of your money. It may turn out to have been literally wrong. The data and the studies on it are quite complicated. When deworming was the rage, people gave lots of money to deworming causes because these are for poor children in Africa, on the grounds that science showed this helped them. But the science is complicated. It's not clear it replicates. It's not clear it scales. Still an open question. There's arguments on both sides, but it's more complicated than initial proponents claimed or suggested. And again, it's an example of what I'm talking about, which is often not that, you shouldn't care about. You should try to study what your money will do. It's just too complicated. No, you should care. You should care a lot. It should be the main thing you care about. And you should recognize how hard it is to do good in the world, because it's very hard to do good for others. It's even hard to do good for yourself. We know that. We struggle with human beings. We struggle with capacity to harm ourselves. At any rate, I certainly have many positive things to say about effective altruism, but I think that I don't want to. I know this is not exactly what you're arguing, but I think it's useful to be aware of the potential to make the kind of argument that you seem to be making, which is that morals are like technology. Culture is like technology. It's ironic that I'm saying that. I'm a big fan of the work of F.A. Hayek, the economist, who was very interested in the emergent and evolutionary nature of culture and its ability in competition with other cultures to be refined and improved, just as technology is improved and refined via competition. But I think there's a temptation, if we look at human history, say, going back to Marcus Aurelius, to say, well, everything keeps getting better because it builds, the knowledge base gets larger and larger. Our technologies, our literal technologies, our techne, our crafts, our understanding of manufacturing, they keep growing. They've become extraordinary in the last 100 years, and we can now go faster, and we can connect to each other, and we have the extraordinary interactive power of the web to share things with other people, and that all of life is like this. But I don't think all of life is like that. Just to take one example, if you look at the evolution of the United States from its founding, okay, it's got a mixed bag at the beginning. A bunch of people who are slave owners arguing that all men are created equal and that it's men certainly more than women. There's a certain hypocrisy at the root of it, but that hypocrisy is, as you implicitly argued, and it's not exactly what you're talking about, that hypocrisy became a weapon to move forward and make progress. We weren't living up to our ideals. We had something to be held accountable for. And I think in the United States that was extraordinary. It had a tragic resolution. The tragic resolution is that it led, the Civil War was horrifyingly bloody, but it achieved something extraordinarily glorious. The end of slavery, not the freedom for Africans who had been brought here under those horrible circumstances, but the trend's very positive. You can't ignore the trend. You can't say there's no progress. There is progress. There's progress in race relations. There's progress in tolerance of sexual differences. There's progress that's material progress. And that's the essence of I think, Pinker's story. And it's also the essence of part of what I think is undeniably true that you're arguing for. Look at what's happening, just to take one example, with freedom of speech. Here's a principle that you think, it wasn't a principle. The First Amendment enshrines it. Of course, even when it was enshrined in the Constitution, it wasn't necessarily, it would have been agreed on in the majority vote by the citizens of the Republic, male, female, black, white, or whatever. But as you would argue, I think right-thinking people understood that it was a bedrock principle that people had to respect. We're moving in the other direction at a frightening pace. In the places where it should be most revered, in college campuses, for example, it's disturbing. Now, is it a temporary thing? Will it swing back? I hope so. But I think it's hard, unlike technology or material progress, I don't think that the path is so obviously for the better. And Nazi Germany, Communist Russia, who knows, particular countries, there's some obvious choices in today's world of places where life is very dark and bitter and brutal, thousands if not millions of people. There's lots of disturbing things. I think I'd like to believe that the process is going to help us move forward. I used to believe that about the United States. Oh yes, we'll muddle through, we'll figure it out. I'm not so sure. The things that made me optimistic there before, I'm not as optimistic as I used to be. So I don't want to overstate my pessimism. I don't want to disagree with you. Certainly many of the things you say are true. There is cultural progress of various kinds. To worry, there's lots of cultural backsliding, and I'm not sure we're ever going to be as civilized as we like to think we are. The veneer, I like to say the veneer of civilization is thin. Maybe I'm overly pessimistic.
Yeah, well, no, I think that part is true, because when you strip off the veneer, you are dealing with apes. Yes. So it's like we're it's hard to be idealistic down to your toes about some of these questions. But I do think we notice the slippage by reference to the gains we've made. And so I share your concern about freedom of speech. I mean, many people have accused me of being hostile to free speech, given a few things I've said about social media. I think that all of these critics have things upside down. But what I would acknowledge here is that it's the birth of certain technologies, in particular social media, even the internet more generally, that put forward certain conundrums, because the significance of speech is becoming something new now, right? And the boundaries between legitimate differences of opinion and legitimate journalism and dangerous conspiracy thinking that is achieving, algorithmic scale based on a disastrous business model, and actually having real political effects and indelible effects, or seemingly indelible effects. What to do about all that is a genuine social problem, and it's just banging on about how everyone should be free to say anything they want, whenever they want, however they want. That's not a remedy. I mean, I fear that I wasn't planning to go down this rabbit hole, but maybe you have a difference of opinion on some of this, so it might be interesting to explore.
No, I was going to go ahead.
Yeah, I was just just take the specific case of deplatforming someone like Alex Jones from Twitter, or even Donald Trump. from Twitter. There are many people who think that Twitter is now some version of the public square, and to deplatform anyone is to violate their First Amendment rights. That can't be true. I mean, the violation of First Amendment rights is something that governments do, right? So it's, when I look at the situation, and admittedly it's a difficult one, but I take the company's eye view of this, and I think that the First Amendment rights of the people who started Twitter, and the people who are on Twitter's board, and the people who are running it, and they have some vision of what they want the company to be. And the question is, should the government force them to platform someone like Alex Jones, who's running rampant on their service and causing his mob to stalk the grieving parents of the Sandy Hook kids who were murdered? And, they're now Sandy Hook parents who have had to move 10 times in order to escape the lunatic attention of a mob of powerfully misinformed people. So the question is, what should Twitter do in light of all of that misbehavior? Well, in my view, they should be as free to not have Alex Jones on their platform as I am free not to platform him on my podcast, right? I wouldn't want to live in a world where the government would force me to have him as a guest on my podcast just because I haven't shown sufficient balance in talking to maniacs. But there are many people who see it the other way, and I get how they get there, and because it is inconvenient to suddenly discover that your Twitter account has been abolished by some, blue-haired woke millennial who thought that you took the wrong side of the trans activist shibboleth or whatever it was. So I get that it's messy, but it is something that I completely share your view of what's happened on college campuses, and I've had dear friends, actually, I think a fellow Hoover fellow at this point, Ayan Hirsi Ali, deplatformed, disinvited from Brandeis, based on again the witch burning kind of moral panic we're seeing. So yeah, it's messy, but again, I just think that all of the mess is salient based on the progress we have made and our expectations of not losing that progress, right? And are trying to figure out how to secure, in this case, free speech as the wonderful corrective mechanism it is on our thinking and on our culture. And we need to be able to discuss ideas, good and bad, because their discussion is the only reliable way to detect errors and to move forward. And yet we have to figure out how to respond to something like QAnon, right, which is emerging at scale on social media, and we've got a former president of the United States giving it oxygen explicitly now. And the question is what to do about that, and how are there cases where preventing, some kind of politically evil singularity from forming is in tension with our default algorithm of just privileging free speech everywhere all at once as fast as we can? And I think that these are interesting political and ethical questions. But it only looks as messy as it does because we're all living with the expectations of having not to fight these battles again, right? We know how important free speech is, or we should know it. And certainly everyone in the Ivy League should damn well know it and not be kicking people off the dais for saying something truly anodyne in almost every case, but which is perceived as hate speech of all things.
Well, I agree with a lot of that. I think I would add a couple things. I would add that the norms that govern behavior in all kinds of different settings, restaurants, your living room, a podcast,